I said something controversial right before we started the show. I'm keeping this part in because it's real.
As you're doing the countdown, you say something like that. Okay, ready.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Tony.
And this is Back for Our Future, the show that goes back for our future and yours. Today, big episode talking about lots of different crazy stuff. Obviously, we are in 1994, big year for lots of stuff in our personal lives as young people. There's a pretty big moment that we're going to talk about on this episode that a lot of people cite as a big changing moment in their lives. Lots to talk about in that side of it. We've got some insane stories coming along. Jam-packed episode. Going to talk about some movies as well. So again, welcome to the show. Tony, how are you? Good to see you back here once again to be making fun of my ignorance.
Yeah, dude, I'm great. I'm always up for making fun of your ignorance. You know this. You know this about me. So yeah, I'm happy to do it on a beautiful Friday. And you know, if I hadn't gotten a big cramp in my calf muscle, I'd be feeling a little bit better. But I'm okay.
Yeah, that's one of those ones, dude. The calf cramp is the one where you gotta you can't do anything except just try and wiggle that son of a bitch out of there.
Out
That's all
for
you
like
do.
next couple days.
Sucks. Sucks. So we're jumping into, it's March 25th. We're going to go straight into this. Now, these kids probably got plenty of cramps, and we're talking about the cast and crew of D2, the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
This is the sequel to the Mighty Ducks. This is D2.
D2, baby.
So can we, to set up context for this, because I don't remember, when did the first Mighty Ducks come out?
Well, the very first one came out in 1982.
That's what I thought. So 92.
Talked about that, but now it's been a couple years now in the Orlando.
So 2 years later,
yep.
We're back for the sequel. I remember that Wade, who is not only a listener, very important key character, if you will, on this show. He was basically like my younger brother. Anyway, he loved it.
Ways.
And surrogate yours. We treated him that way, that's for sure. He loved the Mighty Ducks. He absolutely loved that movie. So I remember when this one came out, he was very excited about this movie. He would have been, he's 2 years below me, so I'm 15. He's 13 years old, 12 or 13, somewhere in there.
He's somewhere. Right? I think so. I mean, it's 94. I'm 17 at this point. I haven't turned 18 yet. I don't turn 18 till October. So he's probably, he's about 4 years younger. He's maybe about 14, 13, so 13, 14, somewhere.
He's somewhere in there. Yeah. Cause I'm 15. Cause then, yeah. So, and his birthday's in October. So he's whatever he is, he's that age. So he's somewhere between, he's between 11 and 13. That's what we know.
Solved it for everybody.
Yeah.
Whatever age he is, he's that age.
It's perfect. It's a perfect answer. Mighty Ducks, does Emilio come back for this movie? I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. Emilio's back for all of them, man. Yeah, he comes back, and him and I have talked about these films, and he liked doing them, man. He was all in on the Mighty Ducks, you know. He caught some flack for it here and there because they were kind of kiddie, you know, but he enjoyed doing them. Years later, I'd work with Scott White, who plays Gunnar Stahl on the Iceland team, and he's a real good dude. Actually, as a matter of fact, as this episode was coming up, we might be able to get him on at some point in time because he's actually become a good friend of mine over the last several years. But yeah, we're going to try to get him on at some point in time. We're going to try to get him on this show for a few minutes. But
that'd be great.
But yeah, I mean, you know, listen, I was always into the Mighty Ducks films because it's sports. You know?
Yep.
And I liked a lot of the kid actors and stuff like that, but I was always a big Emilio guy. You know that. I love that dude. So, yeah, you know.
Look, the Mighty Ducks movies are fun. There's nothing wrong with them. I think it's funny that he caught flack because I know the first one, if I'm not mistaken, did pretty well, and I'm pretty sure the second one didn't do too shabby either.
No, they did. They all did well, you know, and then, of course, they spawned recently with the Disney Plus and all that stuff. They came back with like a TV show for it and stuff. So that lasted a season with him. But But yeah, I mean it's always been kind of a hit, and the was a namesake of a team, an actual NHL team. So it was a big deal, especially back in the '90s. I mean, this was a huge thing, and it kind of caught Mighty Ducks mania in a lot of ways. And I don't think anybody who did the films really had a problem with doing them. I mean, I think they were pretty proud of them for the most part.
I would be. They were. You made a little box office bonus off of that business. I'm sure they had some kind of. I'm sure Emilio had some box office bonus. So it's just an interesting side of thing. And by the way, what we mean by that is a lot of times actors have in their contracts they get a little extra money if the movie performs to certain benchmarks along the
Well, I
way.
mean, residuals back in the day were enough anyway. I mean, with secondary markets and everyone getting paid, residuals in the proper way. We don't do that now, but
Right.
we do that now for a lot of reasons. But I'm not going to get into all of that. But back in the day, they did proper residuals, so people actually did make money when the movie was a hit.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's what's interesting about the fact that and I thought you put this program together very well because it's March 25th. We're going to talk about the Mighty Ducks. It's an innocence thing. It's kids. It's this beautiful thing. Obviously, we're teenagers, so I don't care what anyone says. I think as a young person, until you're really getting into maybe post 18 when you start going off to maybe those college years and life starts getting harder, we're still slightly sheltered by our parents. We have protection. We're most kids are at that spot in their lives. Not everyone, unfortunately, but a lot of us are. You have this innocence of this D2 Mighty Ducks movie. Meanwhile, at the other end of our age spectrum, a hero to a lot of people in our generation. We talked a little bit about the last episode. If you need to go back, you can. You have Kurt Cobain in his journey, which we've already talked about. We all know how this ends, but Kurt Cobain goes to Detox. So while we're watching Emilio and the Mighty Ducks, Kurt Cobain's going into Detox. Which what a juxtaposition of elements.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story, right? So March 25th, which is the same day D2 comes out, and I actually ended up seeing that movie at Carmike and the Dollar Theater, so I saw it twice just to throw those little bits in there at the end there. But Kurt Cobain's gonna Courtney Love's gonna try to do an intervention on Kurt Cobain, and that's also gonna happen on March 25th, and it's gonna be her and like 10 of his friends, and he's not gonna handle it real well. He's gonna have a lot of issues with being in that situation. And I mean, a lot of people have those problems because
Yeah.
they don't always see themselves as having an issue, obviously, and people know that. Um, so he's going to lock himself in a room again, just like he did with the guns, and then he's going to eventually come out and he's going to agree to go to Detox, and he's going to fly to Detox on the 30th. Before he flies to Detox, he's going to tell his buddy Dylan Carlson that he wants him to go buy a shotgun for self
Yep.
protection, and it's going to end up being the gun that he's going to use later on.
Yeah, it's weird too because in doing my little bit of research for this, trying to remember to go back, I was listening to some stuff. The only band member, according to this report, the only band member from Nirvana that's at this intervention is Pat Smear.
Right. That's correct.
Um,
Right.
yeah, and so his manager's there, and his manager says something like, "Hey, if you don't, this is all accounts, right? If you
Yeah.
don't go to Detox, then we'll dissolve. We'll walk away. You'll lose your contract." Because Kurt loved music, and there's no doubt that his music love was there. But I mean, this is a very aggressive approach. I also saw a clip in this same little bit of research of Courtney Love just bawling her eyes out, talking to old Barbara Wawa. That's a callback for some SNL fans. She's talking to Barbara Wawa, and she's just bawling her eyes out, saying it's her fault because she's the one that called this intervention. It's a rough. This whole sequence. You start digging into stuff. It's rough to watch it now as adults. As kids, we don't know what's going on. We're just like, this guy's done drugs. Drugs are bad. You do detox after drugs. You see it as an adult, and here's a mother and a wife. Whatever happened there, but she is upset clearly that she didn't necessarily use the best angle with somebody like Kurt is what she's saying in this interview. It's a wacky scenario, and he ends up at Detox. I told Tony this at the beginning of the show. I didn't know this. He's in Detox with Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers, right? What a wacky dude to be in Detox with.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys end up in Detox together. You know, you'd be surprised how many people go to Detox and run across other celebrities. Like I've heard stories in my career. It's obviously spanned almost 25 years. I've heard plenty of stories about people in Detox and in these rehab centers with other people that you very, very, very well know.
Right. Right. It is. I'm surprised there's not been a super group just called Detox where they have all these guys together performing one big show. But yeah, it's a wacky scenario. So he enters Detox. There we're at now. At the same time, because he basically ends up in Detox right on the 30th. Is that correct?
Yeah. So he goes on the 30th. So
Got
he has the intervention on the 25th, and by the time he leaves to fly in, he's leaves to go to LA. That's the 30th of March.
Yeah, there we go. So in that week, we have again. It feels like '94's got a lot of sequels in it. It just really does. We got a lot of twos happening, but the first one up is the first movie that's out that we have note here is I don't remember it. I'm sure I'm not going to even guess on this, but it's a movie called Jimmy Hollywood. I keep thinking of Doc Hollywood, which is one of my favorite Michael J. Fox movies, but is a movie called Jimmy Hollywood. I don't even know what the heck this is.
I'm kind of surprised you don't know this film, actually, because it's Joe Pesci, and it's Christian Slater, and it's Barry Levinson. So I was kind of
I love Levinson.
Yeah, you should give it a watch because it's pretty good. I mean, it was not a hit. It's like a $30 million movie that made like $3 million. It really struggled at the box office, but yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good movie. It's Jimmy Hollywood obviously it is what it is, right? So he's basically like a failing actor living in Los Angeles and goes through all the things that failing actors kind of go through, and he's got his buddy that's played by Christian Slater, and they go through this whole charade. And I'm going to leave it up to you to kind of watch it. I don't want to ruin too much because you actually haven't seen it.
Yeah, I don't. I genuinely have not seen it. I really haven't.
Yeah, but I mean, he starts to realize that it's kind of this cool concept because he starts to realize that there's crime in the city, and then he starts to take things into his own hands, and it's a bonkers plot in a lot of ways, but really kind of an underrated movie because it didn't do so well. So these are the films again that I really enjoyed when I was younger and still enjoy to this day, and they're much harder to find nowadays when they were much easier to find at one point, and they were very much in the mainstream. And so as you get a little older and you start realizing that, we're starting to get to that age now, our current age, that we were always wondering, like we would hear our parents say, man, I used to listen to this all the time. I can't find it or something like that. Now we're starting to understand what's going on because media has changed so much. And now with physical media kind of being out a little bit more, and obviously there's people that still love it like myself, but there's a lot of people that, these things are not being streamed, so they're just not making it over to the new media at all, which is kind of sad.
No, it is. And it's a really good point in that digging around for this stuff is like, it goes back to people that have physical media collections, or if you were able to find a place to download it somewhere, not illegally, but I mean, like, like sometimes movies will go out of print, but you can retain them like on, it used to be called Vudu, some of these other platforms.
Still around.
But even then, with all of these streaming catalogs, there are movies that have slipped through the cracks that are actually really good films.
Yeah. I mean, so I love my DVD collection, even though it's pretty massive, and I know it takes up space, and I get that. But I mean, as I'm starting to watch for some of these movies and try to find them, that's the only place I can find them is in my own collection. So that's kind of sad. This is a movie I saw at Carmike 10, by the way. I was all in on this because I love Joe Pesci. Yeah. I love Joe Pesci, and I love Christian Slater because once Christian Slater does, I mean, obviously he's got Heathers and he does a bunch of movies, but once he does Pump Up the Volume, and Young Guns 2, I'm all in on Christian Slater. Like, I love that dude.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think later on I got to be a bigger fan of his because we'd go back and watch Gleaming the Cube.
Yeah, of course. He's
And I
got good
love that
stuff
movie.
in movies. I
Yeah.
just once he does those two films in particular, like I
Yep.
become a pretty fan of his.
Yeah, he was hot back then. He was
Yeah.
he was a big marquee draw. Like his name meant something. Pesci did too, but Christian Slater was, he had the heartthrob mixed in with everything else. Um, Christian Slater's not in this next movie, which is another sequel.
Another sequel.
This would be Major League 2.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, Major League is probably one of the most iconic, classic baseball films ever made. People have quoted it for years. It's gold. We talked about it with Uker. We talked about that whole scenario with Bob and all that great stuff. So, Major League 2 is. Do you feel like, before we go into it, do you feel like it was a little bit of a cash grab? Are we back to that comedy sequel cash grab game?
Yeah. So it was a little bit like that, right? I mean, it still did pretty well. It's not. It doesn't obviously have the same cachet as the first film, right?
Right.
Obviously, first film's a classic that has one-liners from start to finish. So, I mean, this is like a $25 million film. They pumped the budget up a little bit. It still made well over 50. So, it did great. But it did, and obviously with secondary markets, it made plenty of money. But, like Wesley Snipes specifically doesn't come back for this movie because of what you just said. He felt like it
Yeah.
was more of a cash grab situation. He wanted to do more original content and more original movies, and it started kind of a little rift at the time between him and Charlie Sheen, who
Yep.
wanted him back. So a lot of the same players are back. A lot of the same guys are back. It's very similar to the first movie in a lot of ways because, again, we're talking about the comedy sequels. They like to play off the same stuff for the most part. Um, Same type of stuff. It's just moved around a little bit. Guys are doing different things, and obviously there's people that are some of the characters are a little older. Some of the players are not actually playing now. They're
Right.
owners or they're managers and stuff like that. But still a funny movie. It's got Michelle Burke from our favorite Conehead in there,
Yep.
and from Dazed and Confused. This is one of her last big movies before she kind of moves more to TV. But yeah, I mean it's a cool movie. If you're a fan of the first one, you're gonna like the second one more than likely, and you'll find enough laughs to enjoy it. I liked all the Major League movies, to be honest with you, even the one back to the minors that has Scott Bakula that's going to come out years later. I enjoyed that movie a lot because it was a complete departure from the first two. So,
Yep.
but yeah, it's not as iconic as the first film. Obviously, if you're going to watch a Major League, start with the first one, but give it a watch as well.
And look, Major League 2 is funny. It's kind of like we talked about it with the Hot Shots movies. Hot Shots 1 is funny, but there's some genuinely golden moments in Hot Shots Part 2, right?
Absolutely.
There's some golden stuff. So, and I enjoy Major League 2. If I'm not mistaken, though, doesn't it change ratings? Doesn't it go from an R to a PG-13 as well?
Yeah, it goes
Do you
down.
know that?
Then the same thing happens for the third one as well. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely not as raunchy, and we
Yeah, and
lose
that's what
lose Rene Russo essentially too. So,
yeah, and that's what made the first one the fact that the first one was a little bit more of a hard R sort of comedy with some of the stuff that they do with. But look, it's a fun movie for what it is. And look, we're talking about March releases. You can't have all grand slams right now, apparently.
like it, I love it. Grand slams. There you go, buddy.
Yeah. So as a theme of this show, if you guys haven't figured out, we could also have a podcast called Drew Gets Grounded, which we cover all the various versions. This one is fairly monumental for a variety of reasons. I'm going to let Tony tee it up. Go ahead.
I say it's the biggest one, right?
Yeah, yeah. It does have the most impact on my life. Yeah. It is the one that does make the biggest changes in my life, for sure.
I mean, the Nintendo Maps is pretty epic because just like the visuals it gives you, right? Sure. I mean, like that's just great.
Yeah.
This is definitely like the one where I was like, man, I don't think he's ever coming back outside. Like I may never see him again. And I live literally directly across the street from you at this point.
Well, Also, keeping in mind, I'm 15. So this creates a whole new scenario for me of I don't have a car yet. So
Right.
now all of a sudden, and we'll tee up what this is, but now all of a sudden, this level of grounding makes me question whether or not I'm ever going to get a car. I think it was threatened to be taken away multiple times. So the only people I had at this point in my life that would drive me around was Tony, Jonathan Green. I don't even know if Mark had a car. So there's only a couple of dudes that I could get rides with that my parents were okay with, and they were 100% okay with Tony. Tony was always a green light. Jonathan, despite his last name being Green, he was a red light. His name should have been Jonathan Red, because this boy, oh boy, did we get into some trouble. So yeah, he's separate story altogether.
Well, this one's pretty interesting because it involves an agent.
It does. Yeah,
It involves agent of the law.
It does involve an agent of the law of some capacity.
Yes. Yeah. We don't even know.
We don't actually know. We
don't know because it was more of a. So, do you want to talk about that part? Do you want me to talk about that part, or how do you want to do that?
I think we should tee up. We should tee up what's at stake. So you should remind everyone what's at stake here.
So as we talked about in the last episode, we all have tickets to Smashing Pumpkins, and we're really looking forward to this show. Everybody's looking forward to the show. There's quite a few of us on the docket. There's going to be probably, at the time, there was probably about 10 of us, somewhere in that range, that had tickets to this show. And only 4 of us are going to actually attend it. And Drew Hall's not going to be one of them.
No, I am not. Not for a very long time. No, sir. So here's the skinny on it. And I will, it's like if you see military documents where things have been redacted, I'm going to redact a bunch of names on this thing.
Got to. You got to.
Yeah. I'm not here to tear anybody down. So a couple of things that you guys should know. So in our neighborhood area where we grew up, there was a couple of key spots, and we've talked about some of these before. So one, there's Robbie's Cool Cream. God, I miss their hot dogs so much. So much. At 46 years old, I could probably eat one a year, but good God, were they delicious, right? And then there was eventually there'd be a Blockbuster up there it was near it, but there's also a movie gallery near a Del Champs, local grocery store. That's all right there. And then there's a recently developed, there's a Schlotsky's Deli. God, I missed that too. We don't have those anymore.
Yeah, Burger King. Yep.
And it's right next to the Burger King. Now, the Burger King is very important. So in our little triangle of fun that we have going on, Burger King at that day was selling Whoppers back in that time frame between 89 and 99 cents for a Whopper. It was unbelievable. So if you're a young kid with not a lot of money, we would eat a lot of Burger King. Well, some of us, and I've talked about before, I have participated in recreational drug use. It's a reality. We've told the story about me smoking. We know that I wanted to smoke because I could just quit whenever I wanted, is what I told Tony, which is the dumbest shit a 15-year-old has ever said, 14 or whenever it was. So here's what would happen. You couldn't smoke, because we were so close to our houses, you couldn't smoke directly. You could smoke inside the Burger King. We wouldn't do that. So we would smoke outside the Burger King, but we wouldn't smoke at our cars because that's complete implication that you're smoking in front of your car. Your parents would see you get yelled at. So there was actually some woods adjoining it. Well, that area became known as a little corner where you could step into the woods, have a cigarette, no one would see you. Sometimes those cigarettes might be left-handed cigarettes, is what my granddad used to call them. Not mine. I actually never did that there. But so some people would go in that spot and do that. Well, there was a huge group of us. There's a bunch of it's boys and girls. I mean, it's our little core group. It's a lot of people. It is a big group. We have at this point, in fairness, we have a really good friend base of a lot of different types of people.
Yeah, we're not going to name them all, but I mean, it's a very mixed group of people at this point. I mean, we've got basically almost everybody represented. So we got
Yes.
males and females, and we got the races all covered, and we've got it pretty much. It's a pretty big group of people.
Yeah, we're a Starbucks commercial. And so anyway, apparently on some event we didn't know because we are stupid kids. I'd stepped into the woods to smoke. Some other people were having left-handed ciggies. I finished my cigarette or whatever. I walked out of the woods. A couple of days later, I get just sideswiped by my parents because, as it turns out, someone in this group, their parents had hired private investigators to follow us around, and they had pictures of probably of me smoking, but they had other pictures of people participating in recreational drugs. And again, this is back in the day when marijuana was a no-fly zone. This is, not a good thing. So they were all having left-handed ciggies or smoking out of pipes, whatever they did. I remember those guys all had different gimmicks. I never possessed any of that stuff, but whatever happened, there was some of that. Then these photos went to the parent who paid for the PI. Then the parents shipped these photos out to whoever they could get them to, other parents wise, because most of our parents talked. And my parents just read me the riot act. I mean, I was just murder grounded. Like, woo. Now, whereas my dad was not as angry about the porn, let me tell you, times changed. This was rage worthy. He was pissed. He was legitimately, and it was ironic because my mom wasn't quite as, and she was mad, but she wasn't quite as mad. But this, my dad was very mad about. So they shut it down. I was shut down. This grounding session, if I'm not mistaken, Tony, maybe I have a clear memory, but it was not like a week. This wasn't, and it wasn't just you're not going to the concert. I literally I was not allowed out of the house for, I want to say it was almost a month.
Yeah, I thought it was about a month. The last time you and I talked about this, you told me it was 2 months. And I know it was a long time because there's going to be some really funny things that are going to happen here, by the way.
Yeah.
So
the reason I say it might be 2 months is because I don't remember. Spring break would have been in April, and I don't remember anything but like maybe we didn't even do anything for spring break. Like I might have gone somewhere with Wade, my cousin, brother, whatever you want to call him, but nothing major. I mean, I was on shutdown. I think that's probably the only person I could hang out with was my two cousins, and that was it. And that was the end of that.
And that was pretty much only if your mom was like there, or was like you had to be around. I mean, so the way I remember this grounding is this, right? And I vividly remember seeing it all taking place across the street, pretty much, right? So I mean, once you got grounded, that was it. I would watch you come home in a car with your mother, drive up the ramp, drive up the little hill into your garage. You'd get out of the car. I might see you walk out of the garage, like around the corner, and then that was it. You disappeared. You were gone, and it was like weeks and weeks and weeks. And I mean, you would tell me later on that really the only thing you were allowed to do was like come home, do your homework. I can't even remember if you were able to listen to the radio.
Nope.
No, I got grounded from everything. I remember that.
I got one hour of TV a week. 1 hour a week. And I chose to, now some people will argue that I wasted it, but I used it to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation.
You got to do what you got to do. You know? You were huge into those shows, though.
I love Star Trek. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it.
Oh, dude, it was bad.
It was pretty bad. So let me tell you how bad this really got. We were so desperate to hang out with each other at some point in time. So if you're looking across the street, Drew's house is a 2-story house. Okay? And it has, if you're looking at the top of the house, the top left window is his window.
Right.
And the top right window would be like the little playroom, which was kind of like a guest room, but it was kind of a like video room where you had like games and stuff. And the top left room. So what happened was I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to get a hold of the guy. We need to talk. And I was like, we're at this age where we got to talk to each other. We got to talk to each other. The world's going to come to an end if we don't talk to each other. So I would go out there in the evening, and and he had these like little bits of bark and stuff underneath, like the plants and everything weren't in rocks; they were in bark. It's how kind of it is down south. It's
Yeah.
more bark oriented than rock oriented, and so I would take these little bits of bark and I'd throw them at his window, just like you see in a movie or a TV show. And I would do this all the time, every day, for a month, weeks and weeks. And he would hear it or he wouldn't, and I'd have to go back and do it again. And I keep throwing these things at his window until he finally heard it and he'd come to the window.
Right.
And this is how we were communicating. You would come to the window, and I would be on the ground talking up to you, very much like Romeo and Juliet,
100%.
while my parents were walking around the neighborhood. They were much more active than they are now. They would walk around the neighborhood watching me do this. And making fun of me so much. I got made fun of so much for this. And of course, the funniest thing was that, there'd be things we didn't want our parents to hear.
Right.
So I had to time out those things as they were walking around. So, like, as they got closer, it would be more like, "Hey, are you watching the Saints game?" Or something crazy. Some sports thing, something that had no relevance to what we were talking about. Meanwhile, what we're trying to do is Drew's gotten grounded a week before the Smashing Pumpkins concert, which is going to be on April 8th, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with this ticket that he's now bought, because every dime to us is precious. And I'm like, and this is before eBay, this is before Craigslist, this is before all these avenues to sell tickets, StubHub and all this stuff. So none of that's there, and we're not even fully on the internet really at this point, so it wouldn't matter anyway. And so we're trying to figure out how to sell this ticket, and I don't think we ever really came up with a solution for it, to be honest with you.
No, I don't. No. I had it forever. Had it for a long time. Oh yeah.
So I was like, I don't think I can do much with it. I was like, if I take it to the grounds and sell it and get arrested at this concert, I'm going to be really upset. And
this particular grounding was rough. Like, it was one that, like I said, it changed my. I won't go into too much of the details, but like, it changed my outlook on life. Like, it was rough because suddenly, and again, I should be in trouble. I don't, and I'm not saying my parents did anything wrong, but man, it was so severe. It was like, I was isolated, and that I was a very social person. So for me, that was like brutal stuff. So they figured out how to get me. It didn't stop me from smoking because, as soon as I had a chance, I'd figured out. I remember, I think I snuck out later on in this window, or later on in this time frame, and I know the window I snuck out of. It was out of the kitchen.
Yeah.
But if you missed a step, you fell into prickly bushes, which happened more than once. Yeah.
Yeah. You couldn't leave. You couldn't leave through your bedroom window. That was pretty high up.
No, I'd die. I would die. There's no doubt. I'm 2 stories up. No, I'm dead. But I remember hanging out of it. Look, that whole window, that whole period of time is just whack-a-mole city. Because I am grounded to no end, and it's all because some private investigator caught us smoking ciggies and pot.
I think,
and turned us in.
Wronged, right? Because I don't think at this point your parents don't know you're even smoking cigarettes. I don't think this is still new. Because you haven't. That just gets started at the end of '93 and '94, so it's only 2 months. And so I don't even think that so it's 2-pronged. Like, all of a sudden you could be smoking weed, you could be and smoking cigarettes. And luckily, where am I in this situation? Am I in the back of the? No, I'm not. I was smart. I decided to hang out in my car, eat a cheeseburger and fries. Every time they would go back into the Burger King, I wasn't in any of the stuff. So every time they would go back into the Burger King woods back there. I never went back there. I've never actually saw where they were doing it because I just never. Not a goody two shoes. I just was never into the smoking thing in general. So it is what it is. But I didn't get.
Yeah, yeah.
But luckily, I didn't get busted. I'm not on any of these photos, and so I
No.
was grateful for that.
If you were, they were like, that guy's just eating a cheeseburger. No one cared. Like, you were the. Listen, we followed all 5 of these guys, and this guy was smoking weed. This guy was smoking cigarettes. This guy just looks like a menace. But this guy, he was just eating cheeseburgers.
The fat guy in the car is just eating a cheeseburger.
This guy's just eating a cheeseburger. They're probably like, oh, okay, he's fine. Which, who ended up going to that concert with you? Who were the 4 people that went to that show? Do you remember?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to get to a little bit of that in a minute, but
yeah.
We'll go ahead and name the people that are going to be involved. It's going to be me. It's going to be our new friend who we barely even know, Andy Oliver. It's Catherine and Jeff. Somehow, I don't know how, because he used to get grounded. This was the thing. This was the thing that made it so funny. Jeff Worley, who we love dearly. And I hope you're listening, bro, and I hope you're doing well. Jeff Worley would get grounded for everything.
Yeah. Sandy, his mom, God rest her soul, she grounded me, she grounded Jeff, but Jeff was grounded more than any human being you've ever met. He was so much so that we hung out in the driveway. I think we've talked about this before. That's the only way we could see Jeff, is we had to hang out at his house in his driveway, and that's what we did.
She wasn't grounded, but she wasn't going to allow him to go to this concert.
Yeah.
Until she heard I was driving.
Yeah.
And then she was like, all right, you can go with Tony.
Yeah.
I don't know why people thought that, but people were allowed to do things with me because they knew I didn't do some of the other stuff that other people did. They knew that wasn't happening. So it's just like,
they also knew you didn't drive like a psycho.
I didn't drive like a psycho. No, I still don't.
You're a very good driver. So it worked out in our favor. All right. So we'll fast forward and hit that stuff up. It's April 1st now, April Fool's Day. The fool on this was, Tony had to point this out to me. I'm going to skip ahead. The fool was, there's a movie that comes out called Clifford. And prior to the show, he goes, listen, I'm going to throw you a bone here. No pun intended. This is not about the dog. And I was like, okay, got it. Thank you. So this movie comes out, and we'll go back for the other one. This movie comes out called Clifford. I don't know anything about it. Tony can tell you. Go ahead.
I mean, I didn't expect you to know anything about it at all. But it's a funny movie. I mean, again, it's not a movie that did real well. It only did several million at the box office. It's supposed to do better with the cast and everything. But Charles Grodin, Martin Short, Mary Steenburgen, and Martin Short is playing this this 10-year-old kid who is really mischievous, and he's supposed to go on this plane trip with his dad and his mom for a business trip. And he causes all this hijinks on this plane, gets banned from the plane, and because of that, his dad calls his brother, calls up his own brother, and which would be Clifford's uncle, and he's played by the great Charles Grodin, and allows him to stay with him while he goes on this trip. And of course, these two just have all kinds of crazy hijinks. He does all kinds of crazy stuff to them, and it's a pretty funny movie. And if you're into Martin Short, you're into Charles Grodin, and I was very much into both of them. It's a pretty crazy movie. It's bonkers, but yeah, I did like it a lot. I wish it had done a little bit better. It's supposed to have done a little bit better. It originally was slated to be like a big summer movie, and did like $7.5 million, and eventually got shelved for a quick bit because the production company was having a lot of financial problems, and then eventually came out. Didn't do as well as it should have, but it's a bonkers movie with a great cast.
Yeah, and
which I saw at the Dollar Theater.
Okay, that makes sense. Because you might have thought it was about dogs too until you. No, I'm just kidding. But now there's another movie that comes out that's really interesting. It comes out April 1st. It's a very interesting movie. And the reason I say that is because I kind of feel like my parents talked a little bit about the Beatles. My mom liked them a little bit. My dad's not a big music guy. I mean, he likes the Beatles okay. Jeff, Worley's mom, Sandy, huge Beatles fan. Worley's a Beatles fan. I
My
don't remember
mom.
him. Your mom's a big Beatles fan.
Every
But this,
every Beatles album there was.
right, on vinyl, by the way,
Uh-huh.
with the,
Yeah.
yeah,
Original.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some rarities. But this movie comes out called Backbeat, and it's a really interesting. What I remember about it, and I know you're going to talk about it. What I remember about the movie isn't necessarily the movie. I remember the impact of the soundtrack, because the soundtrack you obviously had it, but it also infiltrates its way into, I think, grunge culture, and it gets some eyes on the Beatles that maybe of a generation that hasn't really considered them as much. So let's start with that. Let's start with Backbeat. What do we got with that? The soundtrack, and obviously that leads to or the movie leads to the soundtrack, or however you want to approach it.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about the soundtrack first because it's its own entity by far. I mean, I owned it on CD because I loved it. I mean, it doesn't include the classic Beatles songs. It's all the stuff that they covered previous. So the movie itself, and I'll just give the backstory of that real quick because the movie itself focuses mostly on the relationship between Sutcliffe and John Lennon.
Right.
And of course, Sutcliffe is, for those who don't know, Stuart Sutcliffe was basically the first bassist, the original bassist of the Beatles when him and John Lennon formed it, which were originally not called the Beatles with BEAT. It was BEET.
Right.
So that's how they were big fans of the Crickets, and they eventually become the Beatles. And of course, Stuart Sutcliffe doesn't end up as the iconic fourth Beatle. Of course, it ends up being Paul McCartney, who ends up in that role. But the producers wanted kind of a really cool group of musicians to play these guys, and so the people on the soundtrack, the quote unquote backbeat band, is going to be Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum, Greg Doley from Afghan Wigs, Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth, Don Fleming from Gumball, Mike Mills from REM, Dave Grohl from Nirvana, and Henry Rollins from Black Flag. And of
I
course,
mean, that alone is the most insane
pretty awesome.
concept. Oh, it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
And I mean the soundtrack, if people have not heard it, it's really amazing. So I mean you should check it out because every song is wonderful, and it's mostly covers and things like that. So yeah, but I mean it's incredible.
What a lineup of people too. Like all of them end up being heavy hitters in the music scene. I
Oh,
mean, if
for sure.
nothing else,
And absolutely,
Greg and Thurston Moore are two major. I mean, Henry Rollins is odd, but
yeah,
those two guys are outliers to me because they're both extremely good musicians, but they do kind of strange stuff.
right,
You know,
right.
the Afghan Wigs had some popular hits, but Thurston Moore, my God, he's playing guitars with bows and making weird noises and weird tunings, and he's a punk rocker. He's way out
Yeah.
there.
Oh, that's what they said.
Non-traditional.
They were like the Beatles were punk rock before punk rock became really really popular. Which they were like the original punkers, and
Yeah.
especially back before they became like the Beatles, which were a little bit more poppy in spots. But I mean, that's but these guys were touring the clubs, sounding a little bit more punk at the time. So that's why they formed this group of guys specifically. Dave Pirner in 1994 is massive. I mean, Soul
Yeah.
Asylum is huge at this point. Obviously, they still tour with Pirner being the only original member now, but they were huge back in this time frame.
100%, which is
Yeah.
wild in and of itself. Yeah, it's a big movie. It's good stuff. It's one of those things of like, it makes me want to go back. In fact, I'm going to go listen to the soundtrack again because I probably didn't appreciate it as much, especially bringing all that back in. Now that I have a little more musical acumen, I bet that soundtrack hits a lot different now.
Yeah, I mean, and the movie did pretty well. I mean, it's another movie that I saw. This one I actually saw at Village Six. A little change
Right.
up because it was a
Yep.
little bit more pure. Saw it at Village Six. Did like $6 million. Didn't do great. Wasn't by any means a huge hit. Soundtrack was much bigger.
Right.
But I enjoy both of them. I highly recommend checking it out because I mean, got a lot of talented people that to be a part of this film.
There we go. Meanwhile, while this insane music catalog or this compilation or whatever you want to call it, this super group of musicians is putting out that stuff and that movie's rolling in the box office, we have Kurt Cobain who escapes Detox. Right,
Yeah.
he decides to, as legend goes, him and Gibby Haynes are outside having a ciggy, and they're like, "Hey, did you hear some idiot jumped over the wall? Why would you jump over the wall when you can walk out the front door?" As the story goes, Kurt Cobain, a day later, jumps over this wall and escapes out that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, April 1st, he escapes the facility and he hops a flight back to Seattle. And the crazy thing about this flight is he's going to be sitting pretty much next to Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
And of course, he had a big problem with Guns N' Roses, but he's really happy to see Duff on this flight. And so they start talking and stuff like that. And Duff would later say that, you know, with all his instincts, he knew something was really wrong, but couldn't quite wrap his brain around it at the time. Unfortunately, we'll figure that out soon. But yeah, I mean, he leaves Detox. He's not there, but for like a day or two, and clearly had no real intentions of being there. So that's the way that story goes.
Yeah, it's tragic because at this point, his daughter is probably 18 months, something like that. She's pretty young, and you know that's some heavy stuff to think about. But like, he's in that spot in his life where he's going to Detox. He's at the height of his career, and you know he's a dad, and whatever darkness he's dealing with, whether it's from the Detox or whatever it is, he's dealing with some heavy, crazy stuff. And it's a ripple effect that happens. And I think the next piece on here, I'll let you throw that up, but you can start seeing this ripple effect and it starts going quick. This isn't a long escalation. If you think about it, this starts to be, and again, hindsight makes it clearer, but like this escalation happens pretty aggressively. One of the biggest concerts at the time, and Tony, if you want to jump in on this, is Lollapalooza.
I remember when this happened because it was a big deal. Like Nirvana was going to play Lollapalooza in 1994, and Lollapalooza at this point is not what it is now, where it's like just one concert in Chicago or one weekend. You know, it was a touring entity at the time, and so it was a big deal that Nirvana was playing this and basically headlining Lollapalooza. When they drop out, it's a whole charade of things that goes on in the minds of everybody. Why did they drop? And of course, we're seeing this stuff on like MTV, you know, and maybe in the newspaper or something like that. We're not getting the social media. We don't have to get all the reactions from everybody in real time, which is obviously always crazy. But at the time when they dropped out, nobody really knew what had happened. Why are they dropping out? Well, we knew he'd been going through a little bunch of stuff, so we knew it was Kurt Cobain related in some way, shape, or form because we were getting all these stories about this stuff that was going on with him and Detox and things like that. So we figured it had something to do with that. We didn't know if Nirvana had broken up, which was the big rumor at the time, was that Nirvana had broken up, and that's why we're not going on this tour. And so there were a lot of MTV reports. I remember seeing a lot of that stuff, and everyone wondering why Nirvana was off the 1994 Lollapalooza tour. As it was, we'd find out very soon.
Yeah. So, and that ripple effect is like, this was how you got to see, this is, you know, Lollapalooza is taken for granted maybe somewhat now, but back then Lollapalooza started, I believe, in 91 or 92. And they had, this is still before it gets way out of control. It's like 94 is right at the end of where Lollapalooza in some people's eyes becomes more of a popular concert and it's less of a alternative music concert. It starts to happen post 94. For them to drop out's a big deal. What I find really crazy is, And I'm going to let you tell this when they actually find Kurt, because I think it relates. You guys are all in a car. There's a whole scenario that happens there. But when you're done with that, I'm going to circle back to something that I thought was kind of interesting that actually happens on allegedly on April 5th. But go ahead. And so obviously Kurt's going to pass away here. You guys find out. Do you find out before you leave for the Smashing Pumpkins show or during the show?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be the one who drives, obviously, to the show, and I have to pick up all these people. So I have to go. Well, basically they're all at Jeff's house because Andy and Jeff live across the street, just like you and I do. But I have to go pick these guys, all three of these people up, and I find out before I go. So before I get into the car, I'm watching TV and I see that they have found Kurt Cobain. So what's happened here is this, right? So like Kurt Cobain escaped Detox on April 1st. And so the timeline it kind of is he escapes Detox on April 1st and then pretty much goes missing. And nobody knows where he is for like a week. That's basically how this plays out. He's flown back to Seattle. Nobody knows where he goes after that. And then he will be found on April 8th with a gunshot wound and the whole thing, and everybody knows that part of it. But they find him April 8th, which is the same day as the Smashing Pumpkins show. And I will go and pick up Andy, Catherine, and Jeff, and we will drive to Biloxi, Mississippi, which is about 45 minutes away. And we will go to the Smashing Pumpkins show. Andy wearing sandals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, for a lot of these people, this is their first concert.
Right.
Their first concert to actually get to go somewhere, drive by themselves without their parents and stuff like that. This is their first concert. And for Andy, is absolutely his first concert. And he didn't know what to wear. He had no idea. I'm legendary for wearing sandals, but even at this point, I'm wearing closed-toed shoes.
Yeah.
But he's wearing sandals, and he brings like a newspaper and a bunch of snacks with him. And he's sitting up in the front seat with me, and Catherine and Jeff are in the back seat. So we drive to Biloxi, and the whole conversation is about Kurt Cobain.
Yep.
And what this means to Nirvana, and what this means to music, and blah, 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 and what are we going to hear when we get there. And when we get to Biloxi, we're in there, and everyone's just kind of like, you can feel it in this Coliseum. And you can just feel the energy is different. It's not the same as any other concert. You knew it as soon as you walked in, that everybody knew what had happened. Everybody knew that Kurt Cobain had died. It was a huge thing. I mean, if it's not big to you now, then that's fine. But in 1994, Kurt Cobain dying was a massive, massive deal. It was huge. I mean, it'd be like Jimi Hendrix dying. It'd be like Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and all those heroes that people loved back in the 60s. It's like any of them dying. Kurt Cobain was that in 1994. Fair or not fair, whether or not he wanted it to be, whether or not he wanted that on himself, that's the way it was. And so this is a huge, huge thing. And so Kurt Cobain dies. We're in the Biloxi Coliseum. Red Meat, who is a sub pop band, is going to take the stage, and the first thing they're going to say is, "This is a very, very sad day. We are dedicating our entire set to Kurt Cobain. God love him. Rest his soul. It's the saddest day of my life." And that's
Crazy.
The first thing here. And then they play the most amazing set, probably of their careers. I mean, I can't imagine it ever got much better. They broke up in 1997. I would buy a T-shirt from this band, a CD from this band, based off this set. And they were absolutely incredible. And then, of course, Smashing Pumpkins took the stage. And the place went bonkers. And, again, Kurt Cobain mentioned by Billy Corgan on a few different occasions. Original Smashing Pumpkins members. They played everything you could want from Gish and Siamese Dream. An absolutely amazing concert. Here's the funny part. After seeing this amazing concert, we leave and we're getting ready to go back to our car. And I get it. We all get into the car, and I start to turn the ignition, and nothing is happening.
Oh no. Uh,
And I'm like, oh crap. I'm like, I have enough gas, and I have this, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm driving the big boat at this point, the big boat,
yep.
the big gold boat at this point, the big Fifth Avenue. So it's like, it's an older car, it's an early '80s car, and so I'm just turning this key, and nothing's happening. And I figured it was a starter, but I didn't really know. And so I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I mean, this is, nobody has a cell phone. We're in
Right.
a big parking lot. Can't get back in for the payphones. I'm just like, what are we going to do? How am I going to get these 3 people that were trusted to me? How am I going to get them back to Mobile to their houses? And I don't know. It's like people can say whatever they want to about their own faith, and they can say whatever they want to about God. I'm not here to talk about all that necessarily right now, and spew all that to people that don't necessarily want to hear it, I guess. But I'm a man of faith, and I will tell you this: it wasn't even a minute after we got out of our car that 2 guys that I knew very well at the time. Thank God I was very friendly with them. Thank God they loved me, because they drive up and they're like, Tony, what's going on? Jeff, what's going on? And those
No
2
way.
guys, and they never really hung out with us a ton, but they did hang out with us. And that was Troy Tuggle and Steven Silvestri. And they're at this concert with Troy's girlfriend, and they all drive up. And I'm like, Troy, listen, man. I said, I don't know what's going on in my car, but I said, it won't start. I can't get it to go. I said, are you going back to Mobile? And he goes, yeah, I'm going back to Mobile. And I said, can you give us a ride? And we proceeded
Holy
with
moly.
7 people into Troy Tuggle's car, which has 2 bench seating, which is a bench seater, thank God. And we ride 7 people smashed into his car all the way back to Mobile. I give him a little bit of
Oh my
gas,
God.
and that's the brilliant story. And then, of course, the next day, my parents go, well, we'll go get the car in Biloxi. You just stay at the house. And I said, okay. That's code for, we're going to Biloxi. We'll be home a little bit later. We're going to stop at the casinos.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Dude, how crazy. I forgot about and listen, Troy Tuggle, and I don't know, I've lost touch of Steven. I don't know where he went or what happened to him. I think he and I got into a spat at some point with another guy. I can't remember his name.
Trey McCory.
That's who it was. Yep, sure was. I see Patrick Judge on the regular. Shout out to Patrick Judge. He probably listens to this show. He's been waiting for his name. Old Patty J.
I haven't seen him in a long time, but he's a good dude.
He's a great guy. Anyway, one day he might be on our podcast network with his own podcast, which will be completely unhinged if it happens. Anyway, it's crazy because Troy's a wonderful human being, and he's kind of a hippie kind of guy. He's got this really lovely, like, love everybody sort of attitude. And the fact that this dude of all dudes shows up, and he's a spiritual guy, shows up. What a beautiful little moment to get you guys back safely.
Yeah.
That's crazy stuff. I hate that I missed that concert simply because, and I've said this to you, and I say this to Mr. Pickles, my dear friend, who's a huge Pumpkins fan, big Billy Corgan fan, is that's the only concert in my life I regret missing, because not just because it was the Kurt Cobain day, but it was also because that's the only Smashing Pumpkins I really liked.
Yeah.
And so I'll never get to experience it at their peak, in my opinion.
Well, the problem is also, like, and I say this all the time, as bands start to grow and they make more albums, and some of those albums become even bigger. I love the band Power Man 5000.
Yep.
But my Power Man 5000 album is their first album.
Yeah.
Of course, they don't get really big until their second album
Yep.
and third album, second and third albums. So they don't ever play anything from their first album. But I
Right.
saw them in a club with Seven Dust playing their first album. And so
Yep.
this is the same thing. Like Corgan's known for doing that, where he won't go back to certain parts of the catalog. And so you'll never get to see Enough Gish or Siamese Dream and
Right.
all those big songs. He just is notorious for not playing all of them. So it's just the way it is. Whereas on this night, you would have gotten to see both. And that does stink. You know, I mean, that
Yeah.
when you miss those tours, it's sometimes hard to go back because sometimes unless they're like an iconic legend, kind of like, Paul McCartney usually plays almost everything, but I mean,
Yeah.
but some of these guys don't always go back and play the first or second album if they weren't as big then. Obviously, Siamese Dream was a huge album, but I'm saying he won't play every song off of it like he did then.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it sucks. I hate that I missed that one, but it is what it is on that side of it. I also wanted to mention when we were talking about Kurt Cobain, obviously that's a suicide situation. So if you're dealing with anything, find someone to talk to. If you don't or you need help, just to say this out loud, you can dial 988, and that's the suicide prevention hotline. There's somebody that will listen to you and talk to you, and you never have to be alone in that. It is obviously a very challenging time. I take that very seriously. Tony does too. I've had my own challenges with it. If you want to hear me tell those stories, this is not a plug, but I've already done that on another podcast that I'm on, and I get very, very open about it. But if you are dealing with any of that, just consider there's somebody that will listen to you. They will talk to you. They are there for you. It's 988. All you have to do is dial 988. Now, that's heavy, but so is this.
You can also reach out to us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, reach out to us, and we'll point you in the right direction. But you can reach out to us just if you just want to talk to somebody. I read all the messages, so I'm happy to respond at all the time.
100%. 100%. We're always here for you. Now, staying in the tone of a little bit of heaviness. Now we record these. You guys know we record these not necessarily in real time, so this will drop out a little bit later. But there were two actors that both have wonderful. I mean, one's category or one's library is insane, and we'll talk about it. And then we have another one who's the catch is one is 95 and the other one's 39. So we lost Michelle Trachtenberg at age 39, and that got followed by Gene Hackman at 95. Both a travesty to have them go. At least Gene was 95. Michelle going, my understanding is it was complications of a liver transplant, and things went south. The reason she's important, I say this, she's really actually relevant to this time frame. If we're talking about back to 1994, she's also on one of the greatest TV shows, in my opinion, that was of alternative culture that was ever made, and it was a kids show, kind of, and it was a show called Pete and Pete. It was on Nickelodeon. She had a reoccurring role in that show, and that show ends up having tons of crazy cast members of musical bands. Michael Stipe's on it. Greg's on it. There's all kinds of crazy people in that show. She's gone, and I wanted Tony obviously wanted to talk about it some. He understands this stuff a lot more about their history. But do you want to start with Michelle, and then we obviously get to one of the greatest actors of all time with Gene Hackman?
Yeah, for sure. So, and I don't like to speculate on anybody what happened. You'll figure out that media will come to you and explain all this stuff when autopsies and all that stuff is done. We don't really speculate on any of that here. But I mean, she's like you said, she's going to get her start on Nickelodeon TV, which is going to be she's going to have all these great little bits, and obviously Pete and Pete, and then she's going to get her big first movie role, which is Nickelodeon's Harriet the Spy, which she's going to star with Rosie O'Donnell, and it's going to be a really big movie for her. It's going to launch her as a kid actor, and the movie does really well. And I mean, I hear people talk about it all the time to this day. So, I mean, Harriet the Spy is a big deal. And of course, Inspector Gadget, she's going to do that one with, Matthew Broderick. And it's going to be 2004, though, when she's more like a 19-year-old actress and a little more adult, that she's going to release, to me, her best work. And that is, to me, it's a top 10 comedy of all time. I don't think there's really much debate if you actually watch the film, and the soundtrack is just as good. And the movie Euro Trip, to
Yeah.
me, is iconic from start to finish. It's got tons, it's full of one-liners. The whole film is front to back one-liners.
Right.
And she's brilliant in this. And she is gorgeous in it, and her acting is incredible, and everybody's great in it. And this is where, like, I'm like, wow, she's not a kid anymore. Like, this is, like, she's really an adult actress with a great future. And of course, this is one of my all-time favorite movies. And she'd go on to do lots of other stuff like Black Christmas and 17 Again and movies like that. And she was a wonderful actress. And I really enjoyed her work. And I was really sad to see her go and really shocked by it, to be real honest with you. I wouldn't have thought that she was going to pass away at 39. It just goes to show how fragile human life is.
Absolutely.
And no speculation on Gene Hackman, of course. But again, I mean, he's 95, but again, it shows you and the circumstances around his death with dying with his wife and his dog. And again, it shows you how fragile the human condition can be.
Yeah. I mean, if we, and I like Michelle, she, again, I'm a Pete and Pete fan, so I think that's where I'll always remember her introducing it. And Eurotrip's big. I co-host of my other show. I'm pretty sure he's a big Eurotrip fan. He quotes it. I believe that's the movie he's always quoting. He talks about it. It's either him or one of my other friends. I might be mixing them up. I'm stupid. We know that. But the Gene Hackman stuff is interesting because, again, he retired when he was like 78 or something. So he's been out of the industry to some extent. But the fact that this guy is played in look, I don't necessarily love all the dialogue of the French Connection.
Good movie though.
But dude, Popeye Doyle is one of the best pieces of shit hero characters you'll ever come across in your life. Right? That dude is, and his performance is amazing. And then he ends up in another movie called The Conversation, which is Coppola.
No.
This is an insane movie. On today's standards, it would be kind of weird to watch. If you watch it and you knew what was going on then, it is a brilliant piece. It is nothing but acting. And then, of course, he's Lex Luthor, and there's tons and tons of roles. My favorite is Heist. That's one of my jams where, I mean,
well, let's take it. I mean, like, listen, Mississippi Burning is probably my probably my favorite, and I'm gonna end. I'll end this later in a minute with a story about Mississippi Burning because I worked with Willem Dafoe, and we had very vivid conversations about that movie and Mr. Gene. But I just want to go through this list, right? You just talked about some of his iconic roles, and of course Hoosiers as well, that happened before 1990. But since we're a 90s podcast, since we're kind of a 90s show, I just want to talk about his roles. I'm going to go through the entire list of everything he did after 1990. And he's already a legend by 1990. Right. He's already won an Oscar, and he's already a legend by 1990. He's already done a huge catalog that anybody could retire on and be like, that's amazing. He's going to start with Loose Cannons, which is a underrated movie with him and Dan Aykroyd.
Yep.
And Tom DeLuise. Postcards from the Edge, an amazing thriller with him and Ann Archer called Narrow Margin.
Oh, that's a great movie. That's a really good movie. Yeah.
Class Action, Company Business, maybe to a lot of people his most iconic role, Unforgiven. He's going to do The Firm, Geronimo, an American Legend, Wyatt Earp, The Quick and the Dead, Crimson Tide, Get Shorty, The Birdcage, Extreme Measures, The Chamber, Absolute Power with him and Clint Eastwood, Twilight. He's going to do one of the voices in Ants, Enemy of the State with Will Smith.
Good movie.
Suspicion, The Replacements with Keanu Reeves, which is one of the most underrated football movies of all time. The Mexican, Heartbreakers, which a member of this listening audience absolutely adores that movie. Heist, of course, you just talked about it. Behind Enemy Lines with Owen Wilson. The
Oh, that
Royal,
movie's so good.
yeah,
Roy
the Royal
Tenenbaum's so good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Runaway Jury, and then he ends his career with Welcome to Mooseport with Ray Romano.
Yep,
His catalog after 1990, any actor on the planet would take it.
yep, yep.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable how many great movies this man did. So I did a movie in 2015 starring Nicolas Cage and Willem Dafoe called Dog Eat Dog. And I worked with, and Willem and I talked to him quite a bit. And one of the last things I did on that movie was get a poster signed of Mississippi Burning. And so him and I started talking about that movie, and I started talking about Gene Hackman, and we started talking about, like, you know, some of the true to life health issues that he was having when he retired, and that he needed to retire for his health. And I asked him about, you know, how he was and everything. He said, you know, he is what he is. He goes, I said, so what do you attribute that to? And he goes, well, he said, Tony, he goes, he he didn't really like acting.
Oh
He
my
didn't
God.
he didn't really want to be an actor, and he didn't really enjoy it. And so I think he was kind of upset that he had to do it. And he goes, and I'm like, listening to this, thinking, how do you put together a catalog that strong, that iconic, and you don't even really like doing it? That's
Unbelievable.
that's pretty amazing.
Unbelievable. It's that raw talent thing. He's just raw talent. It's absolute raw
Just
talent.
supposed to do it.
Good grief. He's the best, dude. I mean, again, just the 90s catalog is stuff that you know, and a lot of his movies are quotable for me. A lot of his movies changed cinema. Sometimes it wasn't his performance that did it. Like, what people don't realize about The French Connection is handheld wasn't very popular back then, and the way that they introduced handheld in that movie changed cinema forever. There's lots of different. There's VFX that were done in Behind Enemy Lines that would pave the way for some other VFX stuff. And that's just his performance in it. It doesn't matter because he was in The Replacements.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lines in that movie, especially from Orlando Jones, where he's got to stick them on. I won't repeat it because it's a little.
This don't look natural. You know this don't look natural. Now you know you don't.
The last bit of that line I won't say on the show because it's a little offensive. But my God, that is some of the funniest filmmaking, and it's such a great movie, and he's great in it. But you don't get the comedy in that movie without him being that sort of stern coach character. Like, you just don't get it. So it's awesome to celebrate his because he had a long, beautiful catalog. It sucks to celebrate Michelle because hers was cut so short, you know, in terms of her career. To your point, life is fragile. Appreciate it every moment. We certainly do, because that's why we do this podcast, and we hope that you've enjoyed it. Again, if you would like to follow us, we're all over the socials. You know where to get us. On Facebook is the hotbed. I told Tony I'm going to try and post a link. I did find an interesting documentary, 90s alternative metal. It was called Underground Inc.
I'll put it up. Yeah.
Sweet. I think some of this fans might. It's really interesting if you liked. If you had bands in the 90s that weren't all over the radio and you want to see somebody talk about them, this documentary is for you. If they're into alt rock. And yeah, so you can hang out there. Is there anything else you want to say, Tony, before we kill the streams, Ray?
No, I do want to go and give a quick shout out. This past week, I lost my great aunt.
I'm sorry,
Aunt Janice. So I want to do a quick tribute to her. And this episode is dedicated to her.
You got it. All right, folks. Thank you again. Signing off. Tony gets the last word as always.
Peace, everybody.